I didn't ask. Maybe Navenes got it. Is an honor to present? The honor is to all the Vice Chancellor, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, or start from Chancellor?
I do that in this welcome, and then you can just start with the reading of the CV and introduce.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
John, somebody else is logged in as you, but the camera is showing something different.
There's a clone because I'm only logged in one device.
So there's another device logged in, unless you sent the link to somebody and they joined as a panelist, as opposed to
Prof. Chitty, we are live.
On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Principal, Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor Naveen Chetty, the College Dean of Teaching and Learning. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nana Poku, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Professor John Odindi. The Vice Chancellor conveys his congratulations and best wishes to Professor Odindi. Professor Fatu Mudau, the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of College of Agriculture, Engineering and Science, extends his sincere apologies for not being able to attend Professor John Odindi's inaugural lecture. However, he conveys his best wishes to Professor Odindi for a successful and impactful lecture. I would like to acknowledge the following guests this afternoon: members of Council, members of the Executive Management, members of Senate, our inaugurant this afternoon, Professor John Odindi, his family and friends, academics, professional staff, students, alumni, and distinguished guests. A special welcome to our guests from universities and organizations within South Africa, the African continent, and across the globe. Inaugural lectures form part of the university's public lecture series and may only be presented by newly appointed full professors who have been appointed in academic schools and centers. Inaugural lectures present an opportunity for showcasing the exciting and groundbreaking research and teaching being carried out by professors in our university. Each lecture represents a significant milestone in an academic's career, providing official recognition of their promotion or appointment to full professorship. These lectures are furthermore an ideal opportunity for new professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their own contribution to their field, to their academic peers, students, and research collaborators. Inaugural lectures are also a platform for celebrating a professor's academic achievements with his or her family, friends, mentors, and colleagues. Distinguished guests, it is my pleasure to now introduce the Acting Dean and Head of School of Agriculture, Earth and Environmental Sciences, Professor Mutulisi Siwela, who will formally introduce the inaugurant, Professor John Odindi.
It's an honor to read the biography of Professor John Odindi, the inaugurant today. Professor John Odindi is a full professor in the discipline of geography in the College of Agriculture, Engineering and Science at the Pietermaritzburg campus of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor Odindi received his bachelor's degree in environmental studies in 1999 from Kenyatta University. He proceeded to the University of Fort Hare, where he received his Bachelor of Science honors degree in Geographical Information Systems, GIS, and applied remote sensing, and an MPhil in environmental studies in 2003 and 2002, respectively. In 2005, he received a National Research Foundation grant holder scholarship to pursue his PhD in the Department of Geosciences at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, which he completed in 2009. Professor Odindi joined the Department of Geography and Environmental Science at the University of Fort Hare as a lecturer in 2009 and moved to the University of KwaZulu-Natal in 2011. He ascended to the position of senior lecturer in 2016, associate professor in 2019, and full professor in 2022. Prof. Odindi's research area is in applied remote sensing with a particular focus on the use of optical and thermal remotely sensed data sets in urban green ecology and ecosystem services, invasive alien plant species ecology, cropping systems, and vector ecology. He has successfully supervised 12 doctoral and 27 master students and mentored 10 postdoc fellows. He is currently supervising 8 doctoral and 5 master students and mentoring 4 postdoc fellows. He has published over 108 research articles, book chapters, and peer-reviewed conference proceedings in his area of expertise. Prof. Odindi has examined 86 masters and 18 doctoral theses from numerous universities within South Africa and the African continent. His current and past affiliations include Society of South Africa, South African Geographers, Environmental Information Systems Africa, IEEE Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society, Association of American Geographers, and the African Association of Remote Sensing of the Environment. He is currently a council member of the Society of South African Geographers in charge of academic writing. Professor Odindi has been invited to speak at over 75 local and international conferences and workshops that include the Asian Conference on Remote Sensing in Taipei, the International Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, Geospatial Conference in Tehran, the IEEE International Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society in Valencia, the Climate Change International Scientific Conference in Paris, the International Society for Optics and Photonics Remote Sensing in Amsterdam, and the African Association of Remote Sensing for the Environment in Casablanca. Professor Odindi is a National Research Foundation, NRF, rated researcher. He was selected by the Department of Science and Technology and the South African National Space Agency as one of the 52 top African researchers with outstanding contribution to geoinformation and Earth observation and was one of the top 30 most published researchers at UKZN in 2022. With collaborators, he has secured several research grants from, among others, the Wellcome Trust, the Water Research Commission South Africa, German Academic Exchange Service, United States National Institute of Health, Fogat International Center, eThekwini Municipality, the Southern African Science Service Center for Climate Change and Adapted Land Use, and the National Research Foundation. He has served as a board member, reviewer, and guest editor for several high-profile journals. I now invite Prof. Odindi to present his lecture.
Thanks a lot, Professor Chetty, and thanks, Professor Siwela, for that kind introduction. I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's created time to attend this talk. It is indeed a rare opportunity in somebody's life to be addressing such a mixed audience with family members, friends, mentors, my students, and everybody in the same forum. And I'm hoping that the next 45 or so minutes that have been allocated is going to be worth your time. Now, often when I tell people I'm into applied remote sensing, commonly the next question is, what is remote sensing? So allow me 1 or 2 minutes to explain the basic concept of remote sensing before I delve into my niche areas. Now, the concept of remote sensing in itself is not entirely new. We have 5 senses, and those 5 senses can be conveniently divided into 2. Senses that require contact with objects whose information we want to acquire, and senses that do not necessarily require contact with the objects or phenomenon of interest. Now, it is safe to say that a majority of our senses are actually forms of remote sensing. Our sense of sight, our sense of hearing, and our sense of smell actually do not require contact with objects or phenomena whose information we want to acquire. Now, the closest sense to remote sensing is actually our sense of optical vision. Now, in remote sensing terms, we pretty much seek to optimize technology to be able to acquire information beyond the portions of electromagnetic spectrum that our eyes can perceive in form of color. Now, if you look at our ability to see features within a particular landscape, we can only acquire information at a very narrow portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, in remote sensing, we leverage technology to increase the dimension of the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum so as to acquire as much information as possible. And it is necessary to indicate that a significant amount of information is actually beyond our ability to perceive features as color. Ultimately, what we want to achieve is to reallocate these colors, typically a continuum of colors ranging from violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, but is commonly collapsed into 3 major colors: RGB, red, green, and blue. So we seek to reallocate those colors to a wider portion of the electromagnetic spectrum to basically capture information, very valuable information, beyond our ability for optical vision. Now, how do we achieve that? By launching satellites into space. These satellites carry remote sensing platforms, And on these remote sensing platforms are mounted sensors that then orbit the Earth to acquire information that we need for a particular geospatial analytical purposes. Now, satellites are not the only source of, satellites are not the only platforms used to acquire that information. We have aerial platforms. So basically, these are sensors mounted on aeroplanes, for instance, that can be used to acquire information. We have drones that is becoming quite popular in the recent past, and we can actually mount sensors positions at specific strategic portions of the electromagnetic spectrum to be able to collect that information. Now, these platforms have got their trade-offs. Now, for satellites, we can be able to acquire information at a much wider area, but in less detail. For low altitude platforms like drones, for instance, we can acquire information at a much smaller spatial extent, but in much more detail. Ultimately, what we focus on is what does the pixel say? Now, basically, the pixel is constituted of the electromagnetic radiation that is unique to pretty much every feature on the surface of the Earth. And if we match that to the spectral resolution and the radiometric resolution, which is basically the amount of electromagnetic radiation characterized by a feature, and temporal resolution, which is basically the number of visiting periods within a particular location, we can be able to effectively map landscapes. We can be able to effectively monitor landscapes. Now, there are different branches of remote sensing. There is remote sensing of oceanography, for instance. There is geological remote sensing. There is remote sensing of meteorological processes. What I'm interested in is the remote sensing of the leaf. Now, in geospatial terms, the leaf basically forms the basis of geoanalytical processes, because consolidated leaves basically make up a tree. Consolidated trees basically make up a forest. Now, my focus is on foliar remote sensing, broadly broadly referred to as ecology, can be an indicator of impervious surfaces that can be used to, let's say, classify urban surfaces versus rural landscape, and can be able to monitor urbanization. For instance, absence of the leaf can be able to indicate to us the levels of land degradation within a particular landscape. Obviously, presence of the leaf can be an indicator of the vibrancy and the robustness of a particular landscape to provide the critical ecosystem goods and services. It can be able to indicate to us the health of a cropping system. Now, in addition to understanding absence or presence of the leaf, I'm interested in identifying the type of the leaf within a particular landscape for classification purposes. Now, the type of the leaf can be used to discriminate cropping systems based on leaf orientation, chlorophyll content, leaf moisture content, for instance. The type of the leaf can also indicate, provide an indication of invasive plant species within a particular landscape. I'm also interested in understanding the condition of the leaf, which can be used to determine cropping stress, like those created by adverse meteorological conditions like drought, for instance. The condition of the leaf can be an indicator of disease and pest infestation. The condition of the leaf can also indicate the edaphic conditions, for instance. This can include nutrient deficiency, lack of soil moisture, for instance, that can ultimately be used to mitigate the adversities that characterize a particular landscape. Now, within ecological remote sensing, within foliar remote sensing, I'm mainly interested into three key niche areas. remote sensing of natural and invasive vegetation, remote sensing of urban green ecology and microclimate, and remote sensing of cropping systems. Ultimately, what I'm interested in is to spatialize phenomenon, to spatialize objects, so as to optimize decision-making for policy formulation and for relevant mitigation measures at different scales. So I will quickly go through those three niche areas, providing examples of what we've done with my team in those areas. Now, like I've indicated, I'm interested in remote sensing of invasive ecology and natural vegetation. Under this, we've done some work on alien plant species invasion. We've done some work on natural vegetation. Now, cropping invasive species rather, like this Pretoria incana in the Eastern Cape, are known to interfere with geomorphic processes. Now, typically invasive species suppress undergrowth. In some cases, they are allelopathic, which basically means they release toxins to the coexisting vegetation types. At initial stages, they lead into development of rills that can develop into incisions that ultimately develop into gullies, rendering landscape dysfunctional. Invasive species are known to compromise grazing lands, significantly reducing the stocking capacity and rates of rangelands for both wildlife and livestock, whereas fires are known to be a critical management tool in grassland systems. Invaded areas induce intensive fire burnings that affect soil microbial activities, therefore simplifying the soil's ability to sustain ecosystem. Excess burning can reduce biodiversity, and of course, in addition to causing so much losses, invasive species compromise hydrological processes and conditions by simplifying their quality and quantity. Now, in addition to what I've already mentioned, one of the most devastating invasive species globally is the Parthenium. In addition to compromising landscape, Parthenium has got devastating adverse effects on livestock and game. In contact with human beings, they can also be very, very destructive. Now, our work around Parthenium has revolved around determining sensors and image data to optimize the classification of areas invaded by Parthenium and identifying optimal algorithms to classify Parthenium, and basically monitoring trend on Parthenium spread within a landscape. Now, some of the work that we did with Maklase was to try and determine among the freely available remote sensing dataset, in this case, Landsat Operational Land Imager and the Spot 6, which of these available datasets can help us optimize our classification for mitigation purposes. Now, these two datasets have got varied spatial and spectral characteristics. Operational land imager, for instance, has got low spatial resolution but higher spectral resolution. Spatial resolution basically means the size of the pixel. It is generally big. Spectral resolution, basically the number of bands within the electromagnetic spectrum for mapping purposes. Spot, on the other hand, has got a higher spatial resolution but a lower number of spectral bands within the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, given those trade-offs, which of these freely available sensors can help us optimize the classification of Parthenium? What we established in this study is the spot image can provide much higher classification accuracy in comparison to the Landsat image. And this can be attributed to the superiority of the spectral resolution over characteristics of data sets in terms of spatial resolution. What we also established is that fewer patches could be picked up by spot in comparison to the Landsat image. Again, that can be attributed to the spectral resolution, superior spectral resolution that characterizes the operational land imager dataset in comparison to spot. What we established in these two results is that the spot image could identify smaller patches and could also identify spaces within those smaller patches, while the operational land imager could identify slightly bigger patches, but it had a significant amount of overestimation due to the fact that it is characterized by bigger pixel resolution that introduces the mixed pixel phenomenon that is common in remote sensing. So these are the results. Summarize our spot image data, smaller pixels within a landscape, smaller patches within the landscape rather, and our Landsat image, more pixels within the landscape, Landsat only, bigger pixels, spot image, smaller patches within a landscape. Now, we then followed up by trying to come up with a method that could automate our classification process in invaded landscape. So in Kiala's work, we came up with the tree-based pipeline optimization tool. Now, what this tool does is that it consolidates the major variables that are used to classify and distinct Parthenium on a landscape. Leaf orientation, for instance, leaf color, chlorophyll content, leaf moisture content, and so forth. And beyond that, it identifies the most optimal algorithm that provides the best classification accuracy. Now, after coming up with this tool, we tested it on two commonly used remotely sensed datasets, Sentinel-2 and Landsat-8, and we established that Sentinel-2 gave us a much more superior classification accuracy in comparison to Landsat. And this can again be attributed to the fact that Sentinel-2 has got a higher spatial resolution, smaller pixels that could effectively identify areas that are invaded within a landscape. We then followed up with another study by Kiala to identify the optimal period for mapping Parthenium. Now, in remote sensing terms, you want to identify a period where a particular object or phenomenon has got as unique spectral and spatial characteristics, has unique radiometric characteristics as possible from the coexisting species. That then facilitates the discrimination of a particular phenomenon within a particular landscape. So what we did in this study is to monitor the phenological cycle of Parthenium, basically classifying Parthenium in relation to coexisting species within the entire period. What we established in this study, that the month of February provided the most optimal period to discriminate Parthenium from other land-use land covers. Now, in that particular region in northern KwaZulu-Natal, that coincides with summer, and that also coincides with the time when Parthenium is at its most robust stage. Now, typically in policy terms, policies are actually generated at a particular administrative scale, and it becomes necessary to try and determine a phenomenon within a much wider regional scale. In this study with the Arogundade, we tried to establish vulnerable landscape within the province of KwaZulu-Natal Parthenium invasion. So we basically used environmental variables and remote sensing bands, and environmental variables and remote sensing indices. So basically indices is a combination of unique bands to try and increase the value of the dataset, of the image dataset that we have. We, of course, successfully spatialized areas that are highly vulnerable to Parthenium, and of course, identified areas that do not necessarily need any attention. Now, remote sensing of natural and invasive species, I've also been interested in understanding malliferous plants. Malliferous plants are basically plants that generate flowers that bees used to produce honey. Now, with my colleagues at ISIPE in Nairobi, we tried to establish whether we can distinguish different flower types within a particular landscape to optimize apiary location and honey productivity. Now, we focused on bees because bees is a very important source of income in sub-Saharan Africa. It is a critical source of it's a critical nutritional supplement, and it is an important forest conservation incentive because it is non-extractive product. However, beekeeping and apiary placements are threatened by climate change. They are threatened by bee pests and diseases. They are threatened by agricultural expansion that simplify the ecosystem and therefore deprive landscapes of flowers. And they are threatened by agrochemical intensification. In our study, we sought to understand the floral cycle, abundance, spatial distribution of malliferous plants on the African landscape. Critically, of course, like I've already indicated, to optimize apiary placement, mitigate risk to diseases, and improve honey productivity. We also use ecological niche models using bioclimatic, topographic, and anthropogenic variables to determine bee pest abundance. Like I've already indicated, bee pests are a huge threat to honey productivity and apiaries. And whereas we have four general bee pests, there are two that are most destructive: Varroa destructor and Athena timida. And Athena timida basically affects bees at almost all the growth stages, at pupa stage and at adult stage. And typically a threshold of around 3% is more than sufficient to collapse an apiary. We also sought to understand the distribution within a landscape of Athena timida, commonly referred to as small hive beetle. And what these beetle do is they feed on nectar in the apiaries. They feed on larvae of bees, and their waste contaminate honey within an apiary, obviously then compromising the productivity of apiaries. Another effect, of course, is that they induce fermentation of honey within a landscape, again, of course, reducing the quality of honey. Their larvae feed on bee eggs. Their larvae also feed on nectar and pupas of bees within apiary. Now, in Makori's work, we tested several remotely sensed datasets, to establish which of them could accurately classify flower types within a landscape. So we basically tested the WorldView 2 image, the Rapid Eye, Spot 6, and Sentinel. What we established is that the WorldView, with its high spatial resolution, was the most useful in classifying flower types within a landscape. So using the world view, we could discriminate white flowers, we could discriminate yellow flowers, we could discriminate flowering forbs, farmlands, and so forth and so forth. Now, this again, like I indicated, is very, very critical because it can be used to inform areas to place apiaries to optimize bee production. Now, within a savanna landscape, that is very, very critical because we make maximum use of savanna lands. In this case, we did that project in a place called Mwingi in Kenya. We also sought to understand the proliferation of bee pests within a landscape in southeastern Kenya. And we identify the 4 agroecological zones, basically a transect from the coastal region to Western Kenya, divided into the coastal region, hot and humid, the hot and dry Mwingi region. So basically the coastal region, hot and humid, the hot and dry around Mwingi areas, and the Mount Kenya Kakamega regions, which are basically Kenyan highlands of high altitudes that are generally cool and wet. Our aim was to determine the current distribution of the bee pests and the bee pests within this particular landscape and the future spread of bee pests within this entire region. What we established in this study is areas that are cool and wet, like the Mount Kenya and Kakamega regions, were much more vulnerable to bee pests than dry and hot and dry areas around areas of Mwingi. My other focus has been on remote sensing of urban green ecology and microclimate. What I've achieved in this area is to generate novel approaches to model and predict urban green ecosystems and urban microclimate. Specific focus within this niche area has been to understand the implication of urbanization and green ecology, to understand the role of urban green spaces in urban thermal regulation, and to understand the value of urban reforestation in regulating urban microclimate and thermal assimilation. Now, specific questions we've sought to understand, specific questions that we've asked in this niche area is issues to do with fragmentation and spatial configuration of urban landscape. Does fragmentation influence heat characteristics within an urban landscape? Does spatial configuration of urban green spaces influence carbon assimilation? So some of the work we've done is to compare clustered green patches within a particular landscape in comparison to, let's say, trees lining roads, and determining which ones are much more efficient in assimilating heat, for instance. In some cases, we've compared different build densities within an urban landscape to establish which is the optimal mix within an urban landscape that can basically guarantee socioeconomic development and assimilation of heat to facilitate sustainable urban living and urban comfort. We've also explored the concept of local climatic zones, and this is informed by the fact that there is significant developments in optical remote sensing, and we can, with significant accuracy, classify features using optical remote sensing. Now, urban landscapes are characterized by their land to be classified using optical remote sensing. Urban landscape can also be classified using their thermal characteristics. Now, unfortunately, in thermal terms, we have not had significant development in thermal remote sensing, in the sense that the pixel sizes for thermal characteristics within urban landscapes are still very, very low. Now, this creates a problem in matching objects classified using optical remote sensing and objects classified using thermal remote sensing. Our aim using local climatic zone is to basically consolidate optical land cover classes to match the thermal land cover classes so that we can make a fair comparison between, let's say, aspects to do with vegetation and impervious surfaces and their thermal emission within an urban landscape. We've also tried to determine future thermal characteristics within an urban landscape. And of course, we achieved this by first classifying urban surfaces, vegetation and impervious surfaces, and of course, try to determine how they'll expand over time, and then of course use that as a basis to predict thermal characteristics in future. Now, under this niche area, I was a lead editor of a special issue that was later converted into a book titled Thermal and Optical Remote Sensing, Evaluating Urban Green Spaces and Urban Heat Islands in a Changing Climate, published by MDPI. And these are basically some of the works we've done under that niche area, analyzing long-term spatial clustering and vegetation fragmentation in an urban landscape, local climatic zones and how we can match them to optically classified surfaces, and prediction of future temperatures using satellite image data. We've also explored how we can relate urban outdoor temperatures to energy use within urban landscape. So basically to determine the effect of urban warming to energy use within a landscape. Now, one of the most effective mitigation approaches to heat within an urban landscape is reforestation and afforestation. Now, we've basically focused our study in this area. We've basically focused our study on a reforested area outside the eThekwini, outside the city of Durban within the eThekwini municipality. Now, this area was actually established as a reforestation project to mitigate the effect of the World Cup 2010 carbon emission. Now, what we've sought to achieve within this study is to establish whether the reforestation done in phases within this particular landscape is actually achieving the goals that it was meant to achieve from the outset. Now, we've mapped net primary productivity within this landscape at different phases of the reforestation project, and we could actually identify with a significant precision of areas that have been reforested, and indeed establish that they have a higher net primary productivity within that particular landscape. And we've matched that, the ability to assimilate carbon, and established that indeed reforested areas have got a higher ability to assimilate carbon within that particular landscape in comparison to areas that have not been reforested. Another piece of work that we did in that area with the Sitole Kusasa is to understand the structural complexity of that particular landscape with addition of topographic variables. Now, a reforestation project significantly depends on edaphic characteristics and topography to grow. So basically what we wanted to achieve in this project is to identify which areas of the reforested project have got the highest structural complexity. Now, this is important in that we can then target those areas to expand and optimize the replanting or reforestation of those areas to get the maximum value from those landscapes, because the topographic characteristics basically are much more conducive to allow vegetation to grow. Now, understanding structural complexity is also very, very critical, because it is an indication of biodiversity. it is also an indication of a higher carbon assimilation and heat assimilation within a particular landscape. Now, the last bit that I've focused on is remote sensing of cropping systems. Now, whereas we've investigated quite a number of phenomena within the cropping realm, one of the work that we've done is on determining the ability of using remotely sensed data to establish the different stages of Phaeosphaeria leaf spot infestation within a maize growing area. Maize, because it is pretty much the most prominent staple food in most parts of most of the sub-Saharan Africa. Now, in this study, we basically partitioned Phaeosphaeria leaf spot infestation from healthy, medium to severe, and we used hyperspectral remote sensing to determine whether we can pinpoint the specific bands within the electromagnetic spectrum that shows variance with the level of infestation, and they can therefore be used to monitor the disease. What we established in this study is at around 950 micrometers, around 1,100 micrometers, and around 1,900 micrometers, we could actually target those portions of the electromagnetic spectrum to discriminate infestation of Phaeosphaeria leaf spot. Now, this study is very critical because with the growing use of drone technology that then can facilitates use case acquisition of data, we could actually mount sensors for specific purposes within a landscape, including disease infestation like Phaeosphaeria leaf spot, and be able to map those areas accordingly for mitigation. Now, under cropping systems, we've also done some work on coffee. In eastern Zimbabwe, coffee is pretty much one of the most traded commodities in the world. It's probably one of the most traded non-alcoholic beverage in the world, and it also constitutes a significant source of income in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including foreign exchange. Importantly, coffee is also a critical crop in maintaining, in stabilizing the landscape, and of course assimilating carbon. Now, two most limiting factors in coffee growth is chlorophyll and nitrogen. Chlorophyll basically informs leaf vibrancy, photosynthetic activity, which can then, of course, lead to higher yield. Nitrogen for berry development and berry quality. Now, in this study, what we established is that we could use higher spatial resolution image data set to precisely determine chlorophyll content variability within a coffee growing system. Obviously, then that gives us an opportunity to mitigate areas that are not performing well. We also used remotely sensed indices to determine nitrogen distribution within a plantation. Now, again, this is very critical in a cropping system because then it can provide an indication of areas of deficiency for nitrogen application. Obviously, ultimately, you don't want to apply nitrogen. You want to optimize your productivity by reducing costs as much as possible. So you don't want to waste your resources in applying nitrogen, for instance, where you already have a high amount of nitrogen. So we basically partitioned the landscape into three categories: low nitrogen, sufficient, and high nitrogen. Low nitrogen obviously will be areas that require mitigation. So this is some of the work that we produced under this niche area: coffee chlorophyll content modeling, nitrogen and foliar. We also did some work in Murang'a in Kenya to determine fragmentation in agroecological zones. This is very critical because it can be used to determine the spread of pests within a landscape. So if you have clustered areas without spaces in between, then of course you have a higher chances of disease spread in comparison to coffee clusters that have got other crops in between. We've also discriminated Robusta coffee in southern Uganda using hyperspectral dataset. What next? There is still quite a lot to be done. What we are busy with and what we intend to pursue in the next few years is remote sensing, subsurface remote sensing, basically understanding biomass under the soil. And this will be very, very useful in the sense that we can be able to map, let's say, tuber cropping systems and predict yield on tuber cropping system. That literature is still missing. And we can also determine the level of carbon assimilation on natural vegetation by understanding the true distribution of the rooting systems. I mean, some vegetation types like prosopis, for instance, have got much denser rooting system than above ground biomass. Now, only using above ground biomass may not necessarily accurately capture the ability of those ecosystems to assimilate carbon, for instance. So next we will be most likely pursuing issues to do with subsurface remote sensing. One of our PhD students, Mr. Dlamini, is already pursuing that. Now, this journey could have not been where it is without the support of these two esteemed gentlemen. Actually, the journey could have not even started. Professor Kakembo was my PhD supervisor. And beyond teaching me academic tricks, Professor Kakembo was basically a parent to me. Thanks, Prof, for the support and the encouragement. And if I were to choose a supervisor at the moment, of course, he will lead the pack by a mile. Professor Mutanga, the de facto patron of the remote sensing group at UKZN, Professor Mutanga opened his doors from the moment I landed at UKZN and has been supportive ever since. Much more importantly, Professor Mutanga has plugged me to opportunities and networks that I would otherwise not have accessed at all. My collaborators from UKZN, my collaborators from universities from other universities in South Africa, my collaborators from other research institutions within the country, the CSIR and the South African National Space Agency, thank you. My global collaborators from Harvard University and the University of Heidelberg, thank you very much for the support. My current and past postdoc students, this work will not be possible without you. We generate ideas, you execute the work. Thank you very much for staying the course. Most of them have actually proceeded to become very notable contributors within the geospatial world. My current and past master's students, ultimately, these are the individuals who graduate into PhDs and postdocs. Thank you very much for also for staying the course. Without funding, this work would not have been possible. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the funders who've supported our research group throughout this journey. And UKZN, my colleagues in the geography department, Geography Pietermaritzburg, thank you very much for providing a conducive environment to work and be productive. My colleagues in Geography Howard and Geography Pietermaritzburg, thanks colleagues for that support. My colleagues within the School of Agricultural, Earth and Environmental Sciences, thank you colleagues for that, for your support. And my college colleagues, particularly the higher degrees and of course the admin, the authorities at the college office. Thank you very much for the support. This journey began somewhere to my late dad. He created opportunities for us. He had a dream for us, and he worked very hard to actualize that dream. My dad, despite his modest level of education, strongly believed that everything starts and ends with the education, and we are quite a number in our family. And he worked tirelessly on his small holding, growing maize, and of course coffee, and keeping a few apiaries by the brookside to basically take us through school. He's probably the most hardworking human being I've ever met in my life. Thank you a lot, Dad. And we are proud of you. My departed and surviving mothers for molding us to who we have become. Thank you a lot for that support. My brother, Professor Mrej Makochieng, for his material support and encouragement. He incredibly supported me, even at times when I seriously had reservations about myself. Thanks a lot, bro, for your support and continued support. My brother Peter Were, for all the sacrifices and the encouragement. My immediate brothers and sisters, thank you for your prayers and your support in many ways. My wider family, particularly the Jokoludem lineage, thanks for the togetherness. And my friends, thank you for being there during the hard and good times. And on that note, I thank you everybody for creating time to attend this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Odindi. A really wonderful talk. As a physicist, I learned so much about remote sensing and all the work that goes into this. Really inspiring to hear your journey. And I think looking at the comments, you are really have touched many lives and you've made a difference in the lives of many students, members of staff as well. So I'd like to just say thank you very much for that really in eye-opening talk. I'd like to thank all your collaborators, students, friends, and family for joining this afternoon to listen to your inaugural lecture. Thank you very much. The members of staff and our executive teams that are here, thank you all for attending as well. I'd like to also just put on record a thanks to the Office of the Registrar and the Executive Director of Corporate Relations for the work that goes into these inaugural lectures. And this certainly was one of the nicer ones we've attended. Thank you all for all the hard work that went in. And Professor Odindi, welcome to the fraternity as a full professor. UKZN looks forward to your continued contributions, and the college will certainly be looking at you to become the leader that we want you to be and to take on the challenges of working in the college and at UKZN. Thank you all very much, and I wish you a very good afternoon.